Once upon a time, on a table in a kitchen, much like my own, there was a piece of paper. It was blank, white, pure. No blemishes marred its surface. No pencil writings or scribbles or dots left over by crayons were anywhere to be seen. It was pure, unadulterated potential. Anything could happen on this piece of paper. One day, a hand appeared. A hand much like yours or mine. And it held a pencil. One would presume a number 2 pencil, the kind we usually use in school. And upon that page, it started drawing. It drew a rather crude figure of a stickman, the kind that I would draw as an almost 41-year-old person, but typically the kind a small child in school would draw. It had a round head, a stick body, stick legs, and then little stick hands and fingers, and then it had a green shirt drawn onto it. And once the hand was drawing, it went away, and the page once more sat. But something surprising, maybe even shocking happened. The figure started moving. It opened its eyes. It looked around. It looked at its hands, and its little mouth opened up in a circle and went, ah. And then it went to its other hand and went, ah. It looked at its feet and went, ah. And it started walking around the page. Then it did a cartwheel, and then it jumped. It flipped. It did shadow boxing. It did karate kicks. It bent down and put its head between its knees and had its head come up back behind its shoulders. It was a stick man, so it was very flexible. It picked up something from the ground that one would presume is dirt, rolled it into a ball, and threw it in the air. It ran, it frolicked, it sang, it slept. In general, it had as good of a time as any individual solo stick figure could ever have. Now for a time, and it did not know how much time, for there was no sun, no moon, no day, no night, and no clocks. But after a time, the hand once again returned, and the stick figure watched in awe as it approached with a pencil in its hand and started drawing something else. At first, he thought it was another stick man, for it had a circle, and then a body, legs, arms, and then hands. But this stick figure had a beautiful brown hair drawn on it that was so long it went halfway down its back, and it had a rainbow dress drawn over its body, and it had quite beautiful eyes and rosy cheeks. And instantly, the stick man was smitten. When the hand pulled away, the stick girl came alive, and she started doing all of the same things. Jumping around, flailing, digging, cartwheels, flips, shadow punching, shadow boxing. And after a moment, she seemed to notice the stick man, and she turned to him and said, "Who are you?" And he looked at her and he said, "I don't know. I'm just a person in this stick world." And she said, "I too am just a person. What should I call you?" And he thought for a moment, and he said, "Just call me Stickman." And she thought for a moment and said, "Hello, Stickman. It's a pleasure to meet you. You can call me Stickwoman." Yes, these are the very intense type of creative names that only my ultimate intellect could come up with. Stickman hadn't realized that he was lonely. But now that Stickwoman was here to play with him, he felt so much happier. They frolicked together, did cartwheels together, told each other stories. They whispered secrets as they were falling asleep. They snuggled and they became the best of friends. And before long, they fell in love. And they hugged and they kissed, and they were very, very thankful and very, very happy for each other. And for a time, again a time which we cannot determine, they were happy and they had a joyous time and they became the best of friends. Then the hand came back and it drew a heart above them. And Stickman, he did not know where this idea came from, asked Stickwoman to marry him. And Stickwoman, though she had no reason to know what marriage even was, said, "Why yes, I'd love to marry you." And since they didn't have a church or a beautiful place to do their wedding or even wedding rings, they stood before each other and they simply held hands and said, "I promise to love you forever," to each other. And they both meant that promise with all of their hearts. One day, the hand came back, and Stickman and Stickwoman watched it to see what would happen. Would it draw another person? Would it draw a house? Would it draw a building, a car, a monster, a crayon, a pizza? They didn't know. nor did they know what most of those things were. But it came towards Stick Woman, and it came to her belly, and it drew a giant fat belly. Not the kind of belly you would get from eating too much pizza, like I'm generating, but the kind of belly you get when there's a baby in your tummy. And Stickman looked at her and said, "What is that?" And Stickwoman said, "I don't know, but it's moving." And for a time, they both just sat with their hands on her belly and jumped and startled whenever it moved. But somehow, some part of them must have known that it was a sweet, gentle, loving creature inside. And so they rubbed it and they sang to it and otherwise continued about their lives, being best of friends. After a time, the hand once again returned, and this time it drew a building with a big red cross on it. And it drew a vehicle that had a big red cross on it that looked like a van. You and I would know it as an ambulance, but they didn't. And the van came and picked up Stickwoman and Stickman and drove them to the building which you and I would know as a hospital. And they went inside, and for a time, nothing happened in the drawing. It was just a hospital with an ambulance parked outside. One moment, Stickman came out with a giant smile on his face. Stickwoman came out with a giant smile on her face. And what followed them, you would assume it would be a stick baby. But you would be slightly wrong. It was their child, but it was no baby. It was a protein bar, covered in chocolate, with nuts and seeds inside, that had legs and arms sprouting. Now, Stickman and Stickwoman did not know how strange this was, but what they did know is that they and their new baby did not seem to understand each other. Stickman and Stickwoman would tell jokes and hug and kiss and frolic and do cartwheels and somersaults, and they would look up at the sky, though it was just empty whiteness, and they would snuggle and fall asleep. Meanwhile, the protein bar baby they had would just stand there staring off into space, and every so often it would charge at them and just ram into them and knock them down for no reason. They didn't know how normal this was because they did not know any other children, but they knew that something was wrong. Now, the situation with their baby got Stickman and Stickwoman wondering. They were wondering, where did we come from? What is this thing that looks like a big giant hand holding a stick that comes towards us and creates new things? Why is our child nothing like us? Why is it so naughty? Why does it get into trouble? And so the Stickman began to think of the hand as his creator, and he started privately saying thank you to it. And he told Stickwoman about this, and she started privately saying thank you to it. And he tried to tell his stick protein bar about it, but the protein bar would just ram into him and smash and get them dirty with chocolate. And so one day, while Stickwoman and their baby protein bar were asleep, Stickman asked the sky, talking to the hand, and said, "Oh, great hand, give me a sign of your existence. Are you out there? Why are we here? Give us a sign." And he went to sleep. And the next morning he woke up, and in the corner of their page was a beautiful golden sun with beaming rays of light emanating from it. There were now flowers on the ground, and a tree with a little stick robin on top of it. And he yelled up, "Thank you, Creator!" He ran to the flower and smelled it and rejoiced in the smell. He ran to the tree and listened to the song of the bird and felt its rough bark on his hands. He felt the warmth of the sun on his skin and the light and color it brought to the page, and he was happy. He woke up Stickwoman and showed her all these things, and she too grew full of heart. And again, the stick protein bar just rammed itself into the tree, stomped on a flower, and caused lots of trouble. One day, Stickman picked up one of the flowers and stuck it in Stickwoman's ear and thought she looked ever so beautiful, and he became very thankful about this creator, or this hand, or whatever it was. And so he asked, he said, "Oh, Creator, may we have some planks to build with? Wooden planks?" And he didn't know if the Creator heard him. And many weeks went on, and they just lived life as they did. They would play with flowers, they would do all the same things they would do. They would climb trees, nap under trees, and have much fun. But one day, Stickman woke up, and there before him was a pile of beautiful dark oak lumber. and a hammer and some stick nails. And somehow, even though he wasn't a human, didn't have a brain, and shouldn't know this, he knew how to build a structure. And so what he decided to do was build a temple to celebrate the hand. He made the temple a rectangular structure that he and his son and his wife, Stick Woman, could go inside of and sleep and rest and celebrate the power of the hand. And on top of it, out of wood, he built his best representation of a giant hand holding a stick, which symbolized the pencil. And for quite some time, they would live inside of that temple, as they called it, and they would celebrate. They laughed and loved and enjoyed. Protein Bar, as usual, was just outside running around and sleeping in the dirt. One day, after it had been some time without change, and they had almost forgotten that the hand could bring newness, they woke up and they saw something new in the sky. It was a strange shape, one might describe as a saucer, and it was gray, and it had windows on it, and inside the windows, they could see little green stick people with giant black eyes and strange antennas. And this saucer would fly about in the sky, seemingly random. They weren't sure what it was doing. And so Stick Man and Stick Woman went outside, and they looked at it, pondering. Well, Stick Protein Bar rushed at it and tried to jump up and bonk it with its protein head. And as it jumped, a beam came out of the bottom of the flying saucer and tried to lift Stick Protein Bar. Stick Protein Bar started shaking and writhing and doing his best to try to escape. But the flying saucer apparently was not strong enough, and so it wobbled, and eventually the beam turned off and Stick Protein Bar fell to the ground with a thud, leaving a small crack in the white page underneath. Stickman yelled to the sky, "What is this, Creator? Why have you done this?" For soon the saucer started chasing Stickman and Stickwoman, and they had to do their best to evade it. Normally this meant hiding inside their temple, hiding under the tree, or even climbing up and hiding in the leaves of the tree. For whenever they were out in the open, this evil flying contraption would try to take them and suck them up to it, and the green creatures with the black eyes would be up there laughing hilariously. And he asked, "Why, Creator? Why have you done this to us?" But he never got an answer. And since he never got an answer and Stickwoman never got an answer, they stopped saying so many thank yous to the hand. For the beautiful flowers they couldn't see or use because the flying saucer would try to abduct them every time they went out to view a flower. They had a hard time frolicking outside because the saucer would chase them. They felt limited to the tree and their temple. And so over time, they said less and less to the giant hand. And one day they woke up and the hand was outside drawing. And they got down on their hands and knees and they said, "Please, hand, draw us something to get rid of this giant flying saucer." And they hoped, but their hopes were dashed as the hand drew a skeleton with a sword and a shield, and it looked at them with red glowing eyes and started chasing them, hacking its sword up and down. They didn't need anyone to tell them that this was a creature of nefarious purpose who did not have their best interest in mind. So they ran, they climbed to the top of the tree, and they pulled up their baby protein bar and sat as the skeleton circled around the tree down below, its bones clacking, and it raised its sword in anger when it couldn't get to them. While in this tree, Stickman and Stickwoman not only did not say thank you to the giant hand, but they actively started cursing it. "Curse you, hand! What have you done to us? Why are you torturing us? Why have you forsaken us? This hand is evil. It is no creator of ours." And they lost hope, and they couldn't leave their tree, and all they could do was stand up above and tell each other stories. Now, if they had only suspected that the hand was not one of their best friends, it was only confirmed one day when they looked up from the tree they were trapped in and saw the hand drawing in the sky. And they thought, what could it be drawing? You might think it was a moon, or some stars, perhaps an airplane, or maybe even a giant net to trap the flying saucer that constantly annoyed them. But no, it drew an asteroid, the biggest asteroid they had ever seen. And when the hand pulled away, they watched it as it smashed and crashed into the ground, left a great plume of dirt. Fire rose into the sky, and the hospital was leveled into nothingness. Their temple was leveled into nothingness. Well, rubble and nothingness. Their tree was leveled into nothingness. Now, the only blessing in disguise was the UFO and the skeleton were also disintegrated. The stick man and the stick woman and their protein bar baby flew into the air, toppled into circles, and fell on the ground, where they lay for a time, seemingly unconscious. When they woke up, they looked around, and all that remained was the rubble of the building of the hospital and the temple. The sun was gone. The flowers were gone. The tree was gone. The hospital was gone except for rubble. Their temple was gone. This caused the stick man and the stick woman to huddle together in discussion. They started to realize that this hand may have been their creator, but it was not good of heart. It seemed to like tormenting them, to make things only to destroy them, to make little stick people only to trouble them. And so they hatched a plan. Stick man had long ago noticed that he and stick woman only had 2 dimensions. They had height and width. Width. That's for some reason a strange word for me to say. But they also noticed that the hand seemed to have depth to it. It was full and thick and just had another dimension about it. And this got stick man and stick woman to think. Their house and temple and hospital and tree had only been 2-dimensional. What if they built something with 3 dimensions? What would happen? So they dug through the rubble and found as much wood as they could, and they stacked it in a way that made it look like a bridge. There was a beam, and on the other side another beam, and they were going off out of the page. And on those beams they put planks to allow them to walk on them as if they were steps. So stick man and stick woman both climbed onto their ladder, bridge, whatever you'd like to call it, and stepped and stepped and stepped until they popped out of the page and into a house. This house had furniture. It had a kitchen, a bathroom, bedrooms, toys, books, bookshelves, tables, everything you might think. And quickly they ran and they hid behind a trash can because they did not know what kind of strange world they were in. And they heard the sounds of stomping feet hammering against the floor. And into the room ran a boy, probably around 12 years old, who was holding a pencil. He ran up to the sheet of paper that they had only so recently emerged from and said, "Hey, who erased my stickmen? I was going to torture them today with a volcano." And his mom said, "I didn't do it, honey." And his dad said, "I didn't." But Stickman and Stickwoman heard this and said, "Aha, so that's the creature that torments us." And Stickwoman said, "He's definitely evil. Why else would he speak about us in such a way?" They hatched a plan. They waited until the house grew dark, and the house grew silent, and outside crickets chirped, and a crescent moon rose gently in the sky, softly illuminating the building. And they explored around the house, and they found a drawer, and inside the drawer they found knives. And these knives looked much like the swords that the skeleton had, so they reasoned they must be weapons, and they each grabbed one. And they ran around the house from room to room until they found the boy sleeping. They climbed up onto his bed. Stick woman got on one side of his head, and Stick man got on the other side. And they put their heads down to his ears, and they both screamed, "Wake up!" simultaneously. He darted awake, looked around, and he saw 2 stick people holding knives, and he screamed, "Mom, Dad, the stick people are coming alive!" And the stick people shook their swords at him and then ran away. And he got so angry, he actually went potty in his bed by accident. And his parents came in, and they said, "What's wrong, honey? What's wrong?" And he told them that 2 stick people had come into his room with knives and tried to cut him. And they simply said, "Oh, it was just a dream, baby. Go to sleep." And he thought about it and said, "Yeah, it must just be a dream because that is something that's not possible." So he went back to sleep. That whole next day, Stick man and Stick woman just remained hidden. But they waited until he was watching TV late at night. Boy fell asleep while watching The Simpsons. And they climbed up on the back of the couch, and they both pulled on his hair as hard as they could. He woke up, and he looked around, and he saw them running away laughing. And he screamed, "Mom, Dad, the stick people were pulling my hair!" And once again, they came downstairs, and they said, "Son, you need to stop lying about this. It's not funny anymore." And he got sent to his room without dinner and had to go to bed, and he got in big trouble. That night, Stickman and Stickwoman, since they were still 2-dimensional, slid under his door, stood on his chest, and woke him up by punching him in the cheeks. And he woke up and he went, "Oh, don't hurt me, don't hurt me." And Stickman said, "We have no desire to hurt you." And Stickwoman said, "But we will if we had to." And the boy, brave as he was, stayed calm and said, "Wait, why would you have to hurt me?" And Stickman said, "You brought an asteroid down upon us." Stickwoman said, "You brought a flying saucer to torment us." Stickman said, "You made a skeleton chase us around." Stickwoman said, "You made our baby a protein bar." And the boy thought and said, I didn't know you were alive. I thought it was just my imagination." And Stickman and Stickwoman thought about it and they said, "Well, what were you doing?" And he said, "Drawing, just making a picture. They don't usually come to life. I've done this 1,000 times. This has never happened." And this is when they realized, what if this boy had some sort of power? What if he was unique? So they decided, even though they weren't going to hurt him, they decided for sure not to hurt him or bother him anymore. But they did have to tell a little bit of a bluff. And they said, "We won't hurt you anymore if you do the following." Stickwoman said, "Draw us a home, a nice one, with flowers and a swimming pool and lots of rooms." Stickman said, "Turn our baby into a little boy, and we would like to have another little girl too." Stickwoman said, "Draw us a few other houses with friends to play with." And Stickman said, "Draw me a dog." And Stickwoman said, "Draw me a nice car." And they went on and on until they described this perfect, beautiful stick village that they could both live in. And the stick boy said, "And if I do that, you promise you will leave me alone?" And Stickman and Stickwoman said, "Yes, as long as you promise never to harass us anymore. For if you do, we will come back and we will haunt you 10 times worse than we have today. And we will never stop. And you will not be able to hurt us because we are imaginary stick creatures." And the boy shivered and said, "Okay, okay." So the next day after school, the boy went up to his room. And Stickman and Stickwoman joined him and sat on his shoulders as he drew them exactly what he wanted. They gave him requests, they told him what color to draw things, and they asked for improvements. And finally, when they were done, and he was done, they said, "This is beautiful." And they hopped back in. And Stickman shook his fist and said, "We're watching you." And Stickwoman said, "Do not ever mess with us again." And so he laid the page down. He went downstairs and found a frame, a picture frame that his parents had used, and put the picture inside of it just to keep it safe, and hung it inside of his closet where nobody would ever mess with it. And every once in a while he would pop in to see Stickwoman and Stickman and their 2 children and their pets and their friends all enjoying their little lives. And this made him feel pretty good because he had given some creatures a beautiful existence. And so he started drawing other photos with other loving situations and beautiful creatures and trying his best to make them happy. And every so often he would mount a new one in a picture frame on his wall. Until before long, he had worlds of strange creatures surrounding him, living in their own little worlds. Now that might sound like a very entertaining story. And rest assured, this may not be the last you've heard of the boy or of Stickman and Stickwoman. Now, I would like to say goodnight to my Alden. I love you more than words can say. And to anyone else who may have found their way here, thank you so very much for taking the time to watch this story to the end. If you wanted to share this with anyone, that would be wonderful. I'd love if other people could watch these stories and tell me whether they like them or not.